The Archetypal Tarot podcast explores universal human patterns, called archetypes, by investigating the major arcana of the ancient tarot. We recognize these archetypes because they are present in our own life stories, myths, and culture. Each card represents a stage of the journey for understanding the greater story of our lives.
Welcome to the Archetypal Tarot Podcast. I'm Julienne, and with me is my co-host, Cyndera, Quackenbush. And this card that we're about to talk about today, the Tower, is so fraught with fear and superstition, we thought we'd just phone it in, which actually means for the first time ever in our history, we are recording this podcast over the phone.
We're on the phone. We won't be phony. We promise. It'll just be like a phone call on the podcast. It'll be lots of fun.
I know. It's like a call that we're all in on, I hope. And the reason for that is I'm actually in Southern California right now and have been for the last couple of months. And Cyndera is back up in our hometown of San Francisco. And Cyndera, I do have to say I miss our recording studio.
I know. I'm still here though, so
okay.
It's missing you, but it's represented in this phone call.
All right. You're holding down the fort, as it were, which is, I think, appropriate for this card.
That's right. I'm holding the fort, as the English would say.
I'm part of it anyway. So we're going to talk about the Tower card, which is...
Yeah, speaking of forts, we've got the Tower.
Card number 16. And, as I mentioned just a second ago, for me personally, I can't stand this card. This is the one, and you know me, I'm anti-superstition, but this is the one card that if I see, I'm like, blah, like I don't know. I hate this card. So
I know, and our little tower, our studio is like not happening, and it's not happening during this time of the falling tower. That's pretty interesting to me. Maybe I'm the more superstitious one.
Yeah, well, I think that's why this is a great show for us to do, is to sort of, face stuff, with our own personal experiences with it. And, superstition happens. I like unpacking it. I like trying to take some of that out and see, the truth behind what's really going on. Why are we afraid of this card? Other than just taking a look at it. It's kind of scary.
I'm so happy we're talking about this card because I opened up a book about birthdays once. I don't have the information about that book, just happened to, but you've probably seen it. It's this big blue book out there, and it's about birthdays, and you can look up your birthday, and it gives you a tarot card for your day. And I got this card. This is my birthday card, the Tower, and I was not elated when I realized that. But then, this card's really grown on me throughout the years since I've been working with it, and I can really see its value, even though my ego hates it. I realize it's a totally essential card for the journey that we're on, this tarot journey, and any hero's journey has this falling of the tower, which we will soon discuss.
It's true, and after everything we've been through with the last card, so
absolutely.
Let's dig into it, and let's dig into it.
What's going on here? So let's take a look at the images. So as always, I got the two cards that we usually look at, the Marseilles version of the Tower of Destruction, or in French, what do we have?
It's called La Maison Dieu, the House of God.
She's better at the French part than me, and it means what?
It means the House of God.
You see, this can't be so bad. This is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So in this Marseilles, and I think there is a crucial difference in the two decks here between the Rider-Waite and the Marseilles. And the Marseilles is a lot more of a palatable card, I must say. We've got, even the lightning bolt is not even lightning-like. It's very feathery, and it's just simply knocking the crown off of this tower. Two people they look like they're somersaulting from very small windows. And there's rainbow-colored gumballs in the sky. I can handle that. This is, we're going to survive this. But in the Rider-Waite, the lightning bolt is still only, striking the very top of the tower, the crown is, this tower wears a crown apparently, and it's just flying off, and people are falling to looks like it's going to be a very great distance. They've got pretty horrified expressions on their faces. The tower's on fire. So that just feels a lot more chaotic, a lot more difficult, a lot harder to survive. But, there's value in both of these. So we're going to take a deeper look at what this imagery might mean. But let's speak a little bit first about where we've come from along our trajectory. The last card was the Devil card. And what do you make of, we've had some pretty dark feeling cards. Last time was the Devil. Now we've got a falling tower. What do you make of this, Julienne?
From a really basic level, it's like, can't we get a break here, people? It's like, come on, we've had death. We had a little bit of, uplifting the temperance, but to look at this one really, to look at it straightforwardly. And I think it's pretty legitimate to want to complain, to be like, all right, I just had to face, if you did the work with the Devil card, and you took a good look at sort of your own addictions and where you were sort of hooked into some things that are disingenuous, that aren't working for you and aren't working for the greater good of other people in your life, then this one actually is like that. This one just goes, okay, you looked at that, we're going to go a little deeper, and you're going to get to a place of truth, that lightning strike, that like boom, the realization that you can embrace, because you've already sort of, if you've done the work with the previous card and you've looked at it, then this is like another layer of like, maybe if you had frustration and you were waffling a bit with those addictions, this is like the big one that goes, whoa, like here's the big truth, where it's this is one of those cards that's so out of your own hands. It's the only thing I think you can do, because it represents, realizing a truth and a sudden impact and a revelation, disillusionment with maybe what you'd gone through in the previous stage. But what strikes me is you can't do anything about this one. It just happens, and it comes out of nowhere, and the only thing you can do is just sort of surrender to it and accept it, and not fight against it, really. So
in the previous card in the Devil, we saw two other figures, a man and a woman, that were tied to the Devil. They were chained up, but we both noted in the last podcast that they could have chosen to take off those leashes, to take off those quite loosely tied ropes. But in this, something else needed to happen to get that strike of change happening, to get that ball rolling in a new direction. And this feels very familiar to people I've known, and also working in addiction in the psychology world. It's something that they often refer to as a rock bottom, or something happens in life as a result of one's addiction that instigates a major change.
Yeah. The hitting bottom is that opening moment, and it's not something you consciously can do for yourself. You can't, there's a parallel a little bit to like the dark night of the soul, that process of bringing you through. You can't volunteer for it. You can't raise your hand for it. It is the universe's big swift kick in the you-know-what. And we can see that as being, it's your own perception, your own decision of how to work with it, is to see it as a punishment or to see it as a part of your growth. Whether you can continue to be open to that clarity of vision you get from these lightning strike moments, these, like, oh my gosh, there's chaos. The foundation of what you thought you built, which is what I see that tower is representing of everything, even, I think, prior to the death card, because they were shriving away things in that card and letting everything go. This tower says to me, this is like the physical, egoic representation of everything you sort of thought you were, what you thought you were really, really about. And that lightning strike hitting the crown and the top of that tower is saying, nope.
Yeah,
you can't be arrogant anymore, you know.
That's right. And before we destroy the tower, let's take a little look at a little closer look at the symbol of the tower. You know, built from its base, you know, it's not a bad thing. You know, it's a way for the earth to be connected to heavens. It's the human's way of like, I want to be close to God. I want to have a connection with the sky. But it's really this problem that happens when that tower gets a little too tall, and when it gets a crown placed on top of it, blocking that openness, that connection to the conversation between spirit and matter. And so I think that's why the lightning bolt is striking off that crown. It's striking off the very top of it. Like, this is the problem. Things are getting too rigid. They're getting too disconnected from their earthly roots. And that height is the hubris that needs to be struck down.
There's a lot in the symbol of the tower, and that what you were just talking about earlier reminded me of the maxim or the adage that the bigger they are, you know, the bigger they come, the harder they fall.
Yeah.
The symbol of the tower is separation, right? So when, you know, in medieval times, they would put someone in the tower to punish them. They would. It's about being put away, and if you're only including yourself and your own ambitions, and you're building that tower higher and higher and higher, you're farther away from everyone else, and your ability to see sort of beyond your own perspective is getting smaller and smaller the higher you build that tower, because at the top of the tower, everyone looks like little ants on the ground. How can they be real? Right. How can we be interconnected? So this like the lightning hitting the tower, they also call it the card of the ego blow, you know, of that transformation by explosion, of getting back down to realizing that we're all in this together, and that other people are going through the same process that we are. To, you know, we're no longer, we can't see ourselves as being singular and superior. And we have to realize that there's no such thing.
Yeah, that's right. It's too much of a singular outlook on life. And it very much reminds me of what they have talked about in psychology of being too heady or being too intellectual, or beginning to see the world too objectively, which these are all gifts that we're able to have as modern civilized human beings, but we don't want to be imprisoned in our own concrete, in our own objectivity too much, where things just become that cold intellect, seeing people as small as ants, like you just said.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is, I like the phrase finding the grace in the chaos. You know, because I think experientially in our day-to-day lives, the experience of this moment of that universe's swift kick and you know what, the tower, the sudden moment of realization. I mean, it's going to be different throughout our lives. I think it's an archetype that happens, but I think we will experience it in different ways. And that fulcrum that I talked about of whether you're going to be open to the liberation or the realization, or whether you're going to fight against it, is a really a big part of this archetype. And the phrase that also came to mind for me was finding the grace in chaos, or looking for it, or being open to when this chaos happens. What are you also being freed from? What is that opening moment for you? That if you are only concentrating on how bad things are for you due to this change or this giant lightning bolt metaphorically happening to you, if you're only focused on how bad it is, it's going to be really difficult to see what liberation is happening for you. And I think looking at kind of how the card, the House of God, is described as being chaos and crisis and impact and hard times, that list of all of the ways that people experience it is a representation of how we can look at it, and that we do have the choice of how are you going to look at it. You know, are you going to look at it as liberation and transformation, or is it going to be like, this is just disruption, and this disruption means you can't wait to get back to the same thing, the way things were, you know?
Right.
We saw that
right.
with the economy. You know, everyone's all, it's been how many years, 2008 till now? We're all like, let's, not as many people are wanting to get back to the way things were. We realized, oh crap,
That's right.
It'll never be the same.
Right, yeah. So if things are destroyed, are you going to rebuild them the same way they were before, or are you going to think outside the tower and create something new? That's going to be, I'm thinking outside of the box. I'm just going to start saying tower now. I'm just going to be like, think outside of the tower. But yeah, it's not an act of punishment, this lightning bolt. I think that's very important. It's not something you don't have to feel guilt, this immense guilt about something that you were doing. It's simply that things got out of balance with what was happening, and the lightning bolt puts it back into equilibrium and is reanalyzed. And it's so interesting that this card has come up this week in the larger scope of things in the news. That just in the past week with the Pope resigning, and a few hours later, a lightning bolt striking not once but twice the Vatican. I mean, this is crazy. This is really interesting to me.
And to see the Vatican as that tower is very much, made by man, literally made by man, and the representation of this, group of people who is this religious order, this whole religion, and what that looks like. And it's, being kind of an outsider. I was raised Catholic, but hearing on the news people talk about how they have personally been shaken by the Pope's decision to step down. And it's just something that I was like, really? Like, he's just moving, he's not going to die in office. But there were people who were genuinely feeling like they were in their own personal chaos because they really and truly honor him as the leader, and they were shaken by this. Whereas, at least it seems from the secular world, they're like, hey, he totally gets his limits. Good for him. He's stepping down, Somebody so powerful, they really respect somebody who stepped down. But then there's the other people who it was chaos for them, feeling very worried about the future. So that really says a lot. It's interesting to see what culminates around the time that we're doing these podcasts, so we can point to them and make them very, relatable for people. As I'm sure every possible listener, I guarantee you, has gone through a tower moment in their lives, and it is an archetype. It is a part of our human journey. And just recognizing that everyone goes through it's really important.
That is super important. I love the wisdom that you've shared about this card, which is finding that grace in what one feels during a tower falling moment, because those imps are not ready for what they're getting, but if one can trust that this may be leading to something else, I think that can be greatly comforting in times of chaos. And I'm really taking that to heart.
Thanks. And just seeing how these two cards are represented so differently, and we've seen that quite a lot when we look at the Rider-Waite and we look at the Marseille. And for me, it's usually the other way around, where the Marseille is a little dark. But I look at, honestly, if you look at the Marseille, it's like the Monty Python version of the tower. It really does. When you said gumballs, I was like, I thought confetti, because the two characters at the bottom of the Marseille kind of look like jesters. It looks like there's more of a party happening in the card, because all these little colored balls are flying, and that lightning bolt really looks more like a jokey Monty Python thing, and the sort of like the ridiculous and the sublime together.
It kind of reminds me of the whole society's gonna fall. Let's have a party. Things are breaking down. It's time to have a party. I remember that element in doing war protests or going on these marches. People would be like, "Oh my God, this is like a huge party. It's chaos." So that's interesting that element can be captured in a card.
And seeing the two different ones, and it reminds me that there is a part of this, this great realization, a lightning bolt of truth moment that is so incredibly liberating, where it's, we talked about the hitting bottom for the alcoholic or whatever, but when I'm just going to say it the way I say it in my head, is when you feel so screwed, you're just, like, I am so effed right now. Like, I'm free. Like, really, it couldn't get any worse. Everything that I built is, like, kablooey, but you've never felt so free. And so I look at the Marseille Monty Python version of the card, and I really kind of see that representative of, like, hey, you know what? I can let go of all this crap I was hanging on to because this all just happened, and it's really out of my hands. And it's that sense of liberation that we can't feel that sense of liberation when we are building the tower, because we're busy building, and this is the place that we kind of come to, and that when I personally kind of feel like, wow, how come I can't feel this liberation at other times? It's just when I hit the bottom of whatever that I feel so free, and that to me is a lot to work with. That, like, oh, wait a minute, could I? And studying Buddhism and things like that, understand liberation in a different way that doesn't always have to be about getting hit with lightning, having that big change. Like, where else is liberation available for me to realize in the other parts of my life? I just found really interesting, and that's why I love that Marseille card. I'm like, go Mighty Python.
All right, that's great. And I feel a sense of a flashback to the Hanged Man card, who's very peacefully hanging out, and I think we were being trained. We didn't know it back there in the Hanged Man card, but maybe we were being prepared a little bit for this moment. Like, can you be graceful in sort of not being able to move and not being able to make a decision right now? There's a period of stasis, and here we're finding the grace in the falling, and I think that's the beauty of this journey. Now that we're beginning to kind of go towards the home stretch, it's like, wow, this wouldn't happen to us if we weren't prepared for it, in some deep way. Even though it feels like chaos to our egos, we can do this, and that's the meditation offered by this card. But you speak about liberation and you speak about freedom, which brings us to the archetype of the liberator. Will you tell us more about that archetype as you've experienced it as an archetypist?
As an archetypist, sure. The liberator, I think this is a really appropriate one to talk about with this card, because the liberator is, I think, like, if it were a coin, the other side of the liberator would be the slave. And we just met with the devil in the previous podcast, and we talked about the addict. And the addict is a slave, really. Yeah. It's essentially what they are. And so we have this looking at what we're enslaved to in the last part of the journey, and then we move into, what the liberator is and how we can be liberated by outside circumstances, and how we can be open to that, and how we can be liberators ourselves. And the liberator archetype, I think people will tend to think of political leaders and military people, Abraham Lincoln as a liberator, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, people like that, depending on sort of what you believe in, what they liberated from what political leaders, and that's certainly true, and they're good representations of people who are dedicated and driven by the idea of liberation, of freedom, of having people have the ability to make choices for themselves, and to spot where there is tyranny, and to stand up and do something for it, to bring freedom to people. And the thing that comes up for me beyond the what I think of the obvious Abraham Lincolns and Gandhis, there are people that I've met in my practice that really are liberators, and they're working in the health field, or they're working in the world of psychology and therapy, and their motivation is the same. They are working to help people free themselves of their own negative thought patterns or beliefs, or everything from, poor nutrition. I have a client who's works in acupuncture and nutrition, and really what she's doing is she's being a liberator. She's helping people free themselves from their, the negative behavior, or the behavior that's not good for them, the addictions and things like that. And so they're working in the probably less tangible, more philosophical way, but they are about liberation. And you think of the many iterations of Buddha. And what is Buddhism about? I think of that it is ultimately about being free, being liberated from thoughts and ideas and things that are standing in our way of our our own enlightenment, or whatever you want to call it.
This is so interesting that you're mentioning this, because I'm getting a flashback of work that I had once with a client with the tarot. And the way that I work is that often a story emerges from the spread of the tarot cards. And instead of just going to the heady interpretations right away of like what means what for your life and everything like that, we stay within the energy and the realm of the story for a little while, often by having the client close their eyes and be in that story right then and be able to interact with the characters. And for this particular client that I'm remembering right now, she, in her active imagination, was in a very rigid castle, and she was trying to relate with the king of this castle, and she just felt like she needed to be outside, she needed to be with the plants, but there was these oppressive bars on the windows of the castle. She couldn't get out. And I said, well, what do you feel that needs to happen here in this castle? And she says, I just want to take the castle completely apart. And so we just allowed this to happen. I said, you can take as long as you want. And in her imagination, she had all of these helpful workers, and she just dismantled this castle brick by brick. And the king was very rooted in the castle, and I think even a part of the foundation of this castle needed to be kept there because he was still so attached to it. But something moved, the energy was able to shift, and the outdoors was able to come in, and there was no more bars on the windows. And we were able to interpret later about what this meant for her personal life and what she needed to dismantle and break down. But I think that there was something very important, as often the case in tarot readings of the kind that I like to do, which is that in the imagery and in that act of imagination, the dismantling of the castle was the movement of that energy, was the capacity for her to become fluid again, to ease the rigidity of that castle. And I'm realizing now how much that applies to this tower theme and breaking it down and liberating on a psychic level.
Yeah, and just recognizing how separate we can get with the representation of that tower, and how it is a part of the process of taking it down and building it back up. It's terrible. I was just trying to remember the Tibetan Buddhist myth of the oh gosh, I'm trying to remember his name. I'll put it on the website if I can't think of it. But essentially, part of his story is, his route to enlightenment. He went and worked for a master after all these things happened to him, and the master had told him every day or every week he needed to go build this tower, and he told him how to build it. And then he said, okay, now knock it down. And the guy's like, what? I'm not going to knock it down. And he's like, nope, knock it down. So, or the master would come and knock it down for him. And part of, his learning and his lesson was that everything has to fall apart, and then we build it again. And eventually he had a really great sense of humor about it. And I think one of the stories or versions of the myth is that the master came to see him and saw the tower, and then he went, and as soon as he saw the master, he just pushed the tower down. Was like, see, I did it. Like, I knocked it down. You didn't have to tell me. So I was just like, kind of finding a little sense of humor and being like, oh, I get it. Okay, there is going to be a deconstruction, reconstruction. That is a part of life, and when you start to see it, it's easier to realize you're not separate, from either the knocking down or the building back up. So,
wow.
And it's just driving me crazy. It's on the tip of my tongue of what character, what version of the Buddha that was. But I'll think of it later.
Email us and we'll tell you.
I'll hopefully remember. It's just one of those days where I'm like, what? I don't remember anything.
Your memory is in the tower that has fallen, and we must move on. So let's turn to films with this falling of the tower, or even just the tower, trapped in the tower theme.
It's so big. It's such a part of really.
I think it's always happening.
Yeah,
right?
It's a huge, huge part of certainly American and the country of the United States. There's that theme of tyranny and liberty and liberation. So it's a big list, but I'm going to hone in on a handful of the easy ones for the Liberator. Lincoln, most recently, we just had the Oscars. Is certainly there, and I'm thinking also Sally Field. She did the movie Norma Ray. Those are classic Liberator archetypes. But more in the theme with the tower and that situation. I just recently saw the film The Hunger Games. I know, I didn't see it in the theater. It took me forever to see it, but I saw it and I really enjoyed it. And spoiler alert, people, the main character, Katniss, is a young woman. At the beginning of the film, there's her. They have to deal with the potential chaos of these young people who might get chosen to go into these games, or it's like you're fighting to the death. So all the characters in the film are raised knowing that this could happen at any time. So their sense of chaos, it's that tower strike could happen at any time. And throughout the film, the main character is making choices, making very difficult choices in relation to the chaos. From at the beginning, she volunteers to go instead of her sister into this great fight to the death. But her choices, she's fighting and caretaking at the same time, which I thought was very interesting. And her, no matter what, she is truly trying to be liberated herself and fighting for that. And she is also highly invested in liberating the people that she's with, that are either fighting against her or fighting with her. And at the end, she really is making a choice of liberation by all means necessary. And for her, that either means, suicide or, making a pact that they either die or they win the game. And I thought that was really fascinating in terms of the dealing with the lightning strikes and just facing it in the most open way possible. So I thought that was an interesting twist, and I just saw it, so I was like, let's talk about that.
And it's also just hugely captured the imaginations of particularly a lot of young people in our country and throughout the world. Another female author coming forth with these. We've got this Hunger Game obsession and what to do when you're trapped in a situation, and can you see beyond what the high voice of this government is saying, and can you bust out of the tower?
Yeah, and like you were saying earlier, Cyndera, about the way the Hunger Games are set up, that is essentially the tower, and everything's being manipulated, and they know at any time, lightning can strike, and they could get killed, or something could be floating in from the heavens to help them, and that in itself is the tower that they're in. And essentially what Katniss wants to do is take the whole freaking thing down. And I don't think her character realizes that at the beginning in any conscious way. But I thought that was an interesting way, if people are going to, look at this card through a film and through the eyes of this young heroine, it would be an interesting one to look at. And I would encourage any of our listeners too, if you watch, say, any of these movies and you've got some ideas about it, please put it in make a comment on the blog, on the website. We'd love to hear from you because, I talk to other people and they have these great ideas, so I love it when those get shared.
Yeah, that would be great. And turning to other isolating island situations, you mentioned that Tom Hanks in Castaway was another version of this tower. How so?
It really is. Well, the film Castaway, it's a good number of years ago, but Tom Hanks is playing this. I think he's an executive with FedEx, and he is really, really built. He is helping build the tower of the corporate FedEx. He is so dedicated to everything being on time, and he's really created this own tower in his own mind of the way everything has to be, and he's so kind of obsessed with his job that he doesn't even, even Christmas, he decides to get on a plane to go and make sure that things are running on time. And he's just obsessed with time and really falling in step with the way things have been laid out in his life and that he's laying out in his life to the point that he leaves his fiancée behind, essentially. And in the film, I see that as really leaving his heart behind, his feminine side, his, feelings. And so he steps onto this plane, and the lightning strike literally is a storm that the plane goes through. And I believe it's lightning that hits the plane, and the plane goes down, and he ends up in the ocean. He is cast away, and everything that he has worked for, every touchstone of his own life that makes him feel like who he is, which includes his job and getting things done and his watch, are all gone. And he ends up being on this island, I don't know for how many months, a year or something like that. But you see him throughout the film having to let go of that structure and that tower. And really, he has to come back to his life in a completely different way. That whole movie is really about that liberation and how painful it can be, and painful especially because it gets drawn out. And he really had to lose his mind on that island, and the beautiful sort of trajectory of it towards the end when he's coming back, and the symbol of wings throughout the film is really beautiful. So I recommend that one. It's kind of a long movie, but I think symbolically it is incredibly rich and really exemplifies the lightning strike of, you think you got everything going, you think that your mind has arranged everything, and then boom, it's it can be taken away. So I think those are two different ways to look at it, Castaway and the Hunger Games.
And as you were talking about Castaway, I was reminded about Groundhog Day, and it's kind of funny because we just had Groundhog Day here in early February recently. And Bill Murray's character, this hotshot weather reporter or, general reporter in a small town, and he's built his tower of ego, like, I'm the best and nobody can be in my way or cause me any delay or whatever. And he literally gets stuck into the tower of one day and has to relive it again and again and again. And he can't even escape through death, which is such an interesting and painful situation for his ego that he just has to keep facing these things again and again and again. The film has a bit of a moral element, like, okay, you need to be a good person and do this thing, and then you can be liberated. But it's a very fun, entertaining movie to experience for sure.
I think it's another great sort of valid perspective of, the lightning strike doesn't always have to be, you're whomped on the behind. It can be just a repetition of things.
Yeah.
That it can happen in a different way. And I think, for me, I look at the two, and I've experienced both, sort of those lightning strike type things of like, oh, I'm doing this again and again and again and again.
Yeah, sometimes it does take the repetition of like, holy crap, I really am doing the same thing again and again and again. Okay, and that lightning bolt of consciousness of that fact is what helps to liberate you and to change it. For Carl Jung, the lightning bolt signifies a sudden, unexpected, and overpowering change of the psychic condition. And so if you're dreaming of lightning bolts, or even if it's just a flash of sudden illumination and understanding, these are liberators. And they happen to us pretty frequently, but we have to be going through the grind of life to get there.
True, and that being, the more you fight against the change, the less you're going to see the freedom of it. Which is why I think sometimes life will push us down farther and farther and farther until we hit the bottom and we go, okay, yeah, I'm free now. It couldn't get more stirred up. I did it.
And so so through the tower, I think we're finding is that we can see the light within the lightning, and through the fall of the tower, a new illumination.
Yeah.
So it's not so bad, okay? The falling tower thing,
yeah, we lived through it.
Are you feeling better about the tower yet?
I know I am, and I think this is a really fun thing to see what happens next. We're going to go from the Tower to the Star. And
thank God. I mean, stars, they just sound so nice, don't they?
So pretty.
I think there's a naked woman in the next card. This is so wonderful. I'm very excited.
And if people are listening to this sort of in order, I'm gonna hand out a surprise assignment for people.
Homework.
I know. See, I didn't even tell you about this homework. Well, no, it's an idea, just for the heck of it. If you're a movie person, enjoy film. The film, The Beasts of the Southern Wild.
Yes.
Yes.
And why didn't that little girl win Best Actress? I would like to know.
She's 9. I don't know. She's adorable. But it's okay. So here's the assignment. Should you choose to accept it between now and say about a month when we do our next podcast, just watch the film The Beasts of the Southern Wild. See if you can pick out flavors of the last couple of cards that we've talked about. I think starting with death and moving forward, or even the Hangman and moving forward, and see if you see these themes coming up. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that in relation to the Tower than into the Star, because they're there, and how does our heroine, our little 6-year-old hush puppy, work with these changes. And what I want to kind of leave people with is the idea is that these archetypes are flowing, these stages of the journey. They didn't just start when we turned 22 or when we picked up our first tarot deck. They go all the way back, and we're seeing it through the eyes of a child with the Beasts of the Southern Wild. So go check that out, have fun with it, people, and we'll weave that in with the next podcast. How's that sound, Cyndera?
That sounds great. I can totally see the Falling Tower in the Beasts of the Southern Wild. That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. And the Star.
Yes, well, I am so excited to talk about the Star and the Beasts with you next time.
Yeah, excellent. Well, this has been lovely, and we managed this on the phone pretty well, I think.
Yeah, any feedback, things you notice about phone calls or anything else in general, let us know.
Absolutely, and you can reach us at our email address, which is atpodcast@archetypus.com. So until next time, thanks, Cyndera.
Thanks, Julienne.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to become a part of the Archetypal Tarot team by becoming one of our patrons. Our patrons are awesome. So if you're interested, visit tiny.cc/tarot for more information and the awesome rewards for joining. That's tiny.cc/tarot. Thanks for listening to the Archetypal Tarot Podcast. For the complete show notes with references and links, please go to archetypist.com/2013/03/04/tower, or just go to archetypist.com and type in the word tower in the search bar. Thanks so much for listening, and join us next time for the Archetypal Tarot Podcast.